So I received an email from a colleague earlier this week who said that there are, in the upcoming class at HUC, only 10 rabbinical students, which is shocking. Shocking for me at least, because when I went to school, there were 40 in my class. And it begs the question that I think people are asking by their presence or lack thereof, is what is the role that religion actually has? What is the purpose? Why do we come and do all of this anyway? After all, you must get something out of it. You're here. I can promise you I'm very much getting something out of it. So what is it that we're getting out of it that other people may be just not seeing, or maybe they're unaware of, or maybe it's just not an important choice anymore? One of my colleagues commented that when he was in school, there were 60 students, and it was the era of Vietnam, and people were coming in frequently to school to avoid the draft. Or they would choose to become a chaplain to avoid doing things they didn't want to do in the Army. Sometimes students would enter rabbinical school, by the way, only to discern after being there that rabbinical school wasn't for them, which is part of the process in and of itself. But what does it mean for all of us? Maimonides claims that the aim of the Torah, and its very fundamental basis, is to focus on the creation of lives and communities, with encouraging them to manifest mercy, loving kindness, and peace. And that essentially all of the commandments are designed to bring more love, more sensitivity, and more peace into the world around us. Maybe the fact that we're not practicing is why, if you look at Twitter and the current social media bonanza, we see is the absence of loving kindness and sensitivity and the plethora of hate speech spewing everywhere. In the context of increasing sensitivity and peace and loving kindness, Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "Indifference to the sublime wonders of living is the root of all sin." You're maybe more familiar with another verse of his from God in Search of Man, which I've included and incorporated frequently into our service. Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is, in fact, to be amazed. Heschel goes on to argue in this work of God in Search of Man and in other works that the principal character of a religious life is to, in fact, possess and instill within others a sense of wonder. He refers to that sense that it creates an era or an essence in the air that we recognize and understand great fellowship among all beings, and that religion encourages us to bless others, to bless the wonders around us, to even look upon ourselves with an amount of compassion, grace, and understanding. For Heschel, a blindness to the mystery of being constitutes the essence of sin. And what we see that Heschel is arguing is that we need to truly and deeply use religion as the tool to open up our hearts and our minds, to not take the mundane for granted, but rather to see the sunrise as a gift. That wonderful cup of coffee is something enjoyable, and pleasure in the smallest things, those relationships with one another. There's a verse in Deuteronomy that teaches us that we are supposed to circumcise our hearts. It's a confusing verse, because to circumcise anything, it's to do it outside of the body. It's not that you can access your heart easily, it's inside of your chest. I think, at least my interpretation of that verse, is that it is in fact doing, it being religion, the words of Maimonides, the words of Heschel, reminding us to open up our hearts so that it will be more sensitive to the plight and pain of others. The rabbis in the Talmud describe that it was Leah who was in fact the person for whom we learn gratitude. She models it, they argue, or at least Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, says that she was the first person to truly express gratitude to God. And there we read that gratitude is the introduced into this world from this improbable source. Why improbable? Well, as we know from this week's Parsha, here we have Leah, somebody for whom she is described as challenged with eyes, which can either be understood as she has issues with her eyesight, or that she's simply ugly and challenging for others to view her with their own eyes. The Hebrew is ambiguous. Either way, depending on how you choose to read that, we see that there's a comparison of her to her sister Rachel. And I don't know about you, but I was compared to my sister when we were growing up, and it was never a positive feeling. And I can only imagine that for Leah, being compared with your sister does not offer anything positive. Furthermore, when she is forced into a marriage by Laban to Jacob, we also have to ask, was she complicit? Was Jacob manipulating her? Was he in fact controlling her by telling her that she was going to marry Jacob and not Rachel initially? And we hear a flimsy excuse from Jacob about why that happened. From Laban to Jacob about why that happened. But regardless, she is essentially used as a pawn. And then it is her sister for whom she is forced to be with as a sister wife in a relationship where it's clear that Jacob prefers Rachel and she goes on unloved. Challenged frequently in a marriage that I don't know she wanted to be at, finding herself once again struggling. The gift that God does give her is God opens her womb and she has many, many, many children. But it is really one of the most profound things that we recognize and see is that as she becomes a mom again and again, the names that she gives her sons also begin to evolve. Finally, by the time she has her fourth child, it says that she conceived again and bore a son and declared, "This time I will praise Oded the Lord." Therefore she named him Judah. This time she saw that she wanted to live life just a little bit differently. And so she obviously had to find a sense of goodness in herself, a sense of value in herself, focus on that, develop a practice of gratitude, identify it with others so that she could have compassion for them and not take out anger, frustration, most likely, toward her sister, Rachel. It was 50 years ago, to go back to Heschel, that he spoke and taught that human beings will not perish for lack of information, but for lack of appreciation. So what we saw in Leah's spiritual growth is that she recognized that in order to find her own happiness, she had to attend to a practice of gratitude, which I think is why the rabbis in the Talmud ended up arguing and stating that she was the first to exemplify that gratitude. Perhaps maybe that is what we need to exhibit out into the world by living a good life. Perhaps that is ultimately the role of religion, that it reminds us to have that practice of gratitude, to develop a spiritual practice of recognizing the awe, the wonder, the many blessings which exist outside of us, and simply to say, thank you. Shabbat Shalom.